All right, so let's get going on today's class. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to start our look at attention. And this is going to be the last chapter that we're going to look at before the first exam. So attention, we're going to cover, first off, what is attention? So we know the English meaning of the word attention, but what is it considered when you're in cognitive psychology? So we're also going to take a look at serial and parallel processing, two different types of ways of manipulating symbols in your mind to do cognition and its implications for attention. We're also going to take a look at examples of these types of processing with face perception and visual search, and then see the limits of our attention with a little bit of a look at change detection. And then we're going to end it all with a brief look into where does our attention even come from? So how is it that we attend to certain things, don't attend to other things? Where is that kind of driving force behind attention? And before we get to that, we are going to wrap up our look at AI. We were on the Turing test. We only got to talk about that very, very briefly. So we're going to take a look at that to wrap up that section. And before we get to that, though, no, not yet. That'll be next class. So let's get right into it. All right, so the Turing test. This is where we left it off last time. We were talking about the physical symbol system hypothesis for what cognition is. And we took a look at Turing's proof that a Turing machine, a very simple physical symbol system that takes in symbols, changes those symbols, and outputs symbols, could complete, and this is not a hypothesis, this was his proof, it could complete any cognitive task. So the fact that we have general ability to do cognition means that this is potentially a very fruitful way, a very promising way to take a look at what our cognition actually is. What do we actually do when we're doing cognition? It's a good way to approach the idea. So then the last thing we turned to was, when do you have enough cognitive abilities to be able to say that you have mentality, that you have a mind? You're not just a calculator, you're not just an abacus, you actually have attained or passed the threshold for what we call having a mind. And the Turing test was the idea that if you could fool a human into thinking that you're a person, then because we assume other people have minds, we would then also have to assume that the AI also had a mind. So if you can basically fool an individual, a human being, into thinking that you are a human, then whatever did the fooling, whatever that artificial intelligence is, we have to also give it the benefit of the doubt, the same assumption that we do with other humans, that it has a mind. So Turing came up with the Turing test. It can be framed as an imitation game. So what you do is you have two rooms, and you randomly assign in one of the rooms your AI program that you're testing for mentality, and the other room is an average human. And then what you do is you have human testers that will text questions to each of the rooms, and then based on an analysis of their responses, try to determine which one of these is the computer and which one is the human. So if this person sent in a question, what is the capital of France? And room A said it's Paris, and room B said it's Paris, well then that's not really telling you one way or the other which one of these is the human. So far, this AI would have passed the Turing test. But yep?
Has Alexa passed it?
We'll get to that in just a moment. And we'll get to a question of whether or not they need to pass it. What was that?
Sometimes I have full-on conversations with her.
Yeah.
I need to know something.
Yeah. We're getting to the point where it's massively close. So another question you could ask. You know, we saw this one. Which would you most prefer? A puppy, a pretty flower from your sweetie, a large properly formatted data file. And now you get the answers C and B. So now you start to think to yourself, okay, maybe I know where the computer is. Maybe I know where the AI program is. And the idea is that if you have a number of testers, right? So you would have a sample of testers. If half of them choose room A as having the AI, but the other half choose room B as having the AI. If the computer can fool the tester 50% of the time, then it has passed the Turing test, and we must say that yes, this computer, this AI program has mentality. So, like I said, if the questioner identifies the room with a human at chance levels, then we conclude, according to the Turing test, that the computer has a mind, because again, this is the same benefit of the doubt that we give to other people. So if I carry on a conversation with you and you sound like a regular individual, then usually I would assume, yes, you have a mind. Same way for interactions with computers. So as we mentioned before, passing the Turing test is a sufficient condition for mentality. It's not a necessary condition for mentality, because a lot of things that we would consider to have minds would not pass the Turing test, such as animals or people with developmental difficulties. However, it's sufficient. It's enough. If you pass the Turing test, the argument is that you cannot deny that that thing has a mind. So it's a sufficient condition, but the question is it necessary? And this is where the Alexa type of argument comes in, because it might be necessary, but then again, we are getting to the point now where you can fail the Turing test for reasons that were not originally thought would occur. So in answer to whether Alexa can pass the Turing test, there is a prize, a Loebner Prize it's called, in artificial intelligence, and it is an annual Turing test contest where people put in their artificial intelligence programs, and the prize for passing the Turing test is $100,000 and the gold medal. So if you can pass the Turing test, if you submit your program and you can pass the Turing test, you win $100,000 and you win the gold medal, and so far it has never been awarded. So I don't know if Alexa or Siri or any of those other personal assistants either have not been entered, or if they are not a true AI type of program. So I don't know how much human involvement is in Alexa. Does anybody know? Do you have?
I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
So on the flip side of it, I would expect a computer, especially if I was in an environment where I was trying to guess a computer or human.
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point, too much information, too much knowledge, I would be like, that's not a human. I don't think a human would be able to comprehend or supply.
Yeah.
I mean, in the complete sci-fi form of like Data, or like in Star Trek, like all like the androids clearly have human characteristics, but it way surpasses even the benefit of the doubt you give a human. Does that go into play at all?
Well, that is why some theorists are no longer considering the Turing test as a clear indication of mentality, because we are now, for the first time ever, getting to the point where computers would technically fail the Turing test, but because, like you mentioned, they outperform humans, and you would say things like, well, this is a wonderful conversation that I've just had with this, mystery room, but the answers are way too good compared to that other person's answer. So this is a computer.
I don't know. I not know half the answers, I'm sure.
Because we're getting
unless I was allowed to Google.
Yeah, well, unless you're allowed to cheat and use a computer. But that's the kind of weakness now, I think, of the Turing test, is that you can fail, but on the wrong side of things, right? It used to be envisioned that a computer wouldn't be good enough, but now we're getting maybe to the point where computers are actually better than humans, and then failing the Turing test because of that. So one thing that I wanted to just point out, we got two links here that you can check out. One is for Jabberwocky and one is for Mitsuku. These are actually two programs that have been submitted for the Loebner Prize. And I'll just open up Jabberwocky here so we can take a look at what it's all about. All right, so this is a AI program, and it's text-based. So you send in, have you ever wondered, so this is when you log in, they'll ask you something. Have you ever wondered why we are here? So what would you answer to that? Anybody want to send Jabberwocky a reply? No, I heard no. I heard no first. No. So you can send in no. Because you're a robot. So what might you reply to because you're a robot?
Do you know from experience?
Ooh, do you know from...
Yes.
Yes. So you are a robot?
No.
No. You are contradicting yourself.
No.
Okay. So, well, let me let's try one last one. Do you like flowers? Yes, flowers are pretty. Okay, so in this case, is it a robot? Is it not a robot? Notice it really hasn't made anything that sounds too unlike a human response. It does seem like a little bit of a human that is short on time, or maybe, you know, a little bit annoyed with you. But again, this is the kind of program that would be entered into the Whodunnit Prize. And these, Jabberwocky and Mitsuko are one of the best performers. They're the ones that are getting closest to actually being able to pass that Turing test. Now, on the other hand, the question can be asked if whether or not the Turing test is even valid anymore. And the $100,000 prize has never been awarded, but more money has been won by going on Jeopardy. So this is a video from a few years back. I believe it's like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago that IBM put together an artificial intelligence program that was designed to play Jeopardy. So let's take a look at this AI taking on two of the best players in the history of Jeopardy.
Correct. Tell me what that was.
In Jeopardy's 47-year history, there has never been a contestant like Watson. With 15 terabytes of random access memory, the IBM supercomputer has gobbled up encyclopedias, dictionaries, books, news, movie scripts, and more. Why? To beat these guys, for one. Ken Jennings won a record 74 consecutive Jeopardy games. Brad Rutter has earned more than $3 million in prize money. But Watson isn't in it necessarily for the prize money from the real matches planned for next month. IBM says the technology can help speed up medical diagnosis and other challenging computer tests. So how does it work?
It's a massively parallel probabilistic evidence-based architecture. That's a mouthful. But the way to think about it is it's taking that clue, it's taking that category, it's taking the surrounding clues in that category, it's dissecting it, understanding it from many different dimensions.
Watson, Rutter, and Jennings played a demo round for the press, and Watson didn't hold back.
I've never said this on TV. 6 decades for 200. Kathleen Pickens' excavation of this city, mentioned in Joshua, showed the walls had been repaired 17 times. Watson.
What is Jericho?
Correct.
400, same category.
This mystery author and her archaeologist hubby dug in hopes of finding the lost Syrian city of Urkesh. Watson?
Who is Agatha Christie?
Correct.
For Jennings, playing Jeopardy is old hat. But does playing against something that's the size of 10 refrigerators give him pause?
I did not play Watson until this morning. Until an hour ago, I had never picked up a buzzer against Watson. And it turns out to be like playing a very good human player. It knows its stuff. To cheat on the stage, you gotta know your stuff. But it can be beat, both on the buzzer and on the clues, it turns out.
If you're a betting man, do you bet on yourself?
I don't know if there's a Vegas line, but always bet on humanity.
Rutter didn't let on like he was the least bit intimidated.
I think there's a little bit of having to strike the blow for humanity against the machines going on here. But from the rehearsals we've done, in the gameplay, Watson is pretty much just a really good Jeopardy player. So it's kind of the same thing, but I guess there is a little extra pressure at having to represent the humans against the machines.
Host Alex Trebek isn't intimidated by the processing power either. He has seen all kinds of contestants take the stage.
I think the most intriguing thing about this challenge on Jeopardy featuring Watson and two of our best players ever is where do we go from here? How do we follow this? But I'm sure that within a couple of years or so, we'll figure something out.
Indeed they will, unless, of course, Watson figures it out first. Rossington, The Associated Press.
All right, so that was Watson. And that was the pregame. So now let's take a look at how he did in the actual tournament. Okay. Yep.
In the battle of man versus machine game show style, Machine is coming out ahead on the television show Jeopardy. Watson, a creation of IBM, has a commanding lead over humans Ken Jennings and Brad Reuter when it comes to bucks, some $35,000. But his database of trivia knowledge not perfect in the round of Final Jeopardy.
Its largest airport is named for a World War II hero. Its second largest for a World War II battle. And you wrote down what is Chicago. That is correct. I have to feel that he came up with a correct response. Did he? Yes, and the response was?
All right, so before we get to what the actual response is, Ken Jennings, the guy that won 74 times in a row, if you watched his games, he was well known for going into Final Jeopardy where it was mathematically impossible for anybody else to win. So the most you can do in Final Jeopardy is double your money, and he usually had, or very often had, more than twice the amount of the next closest player. So going into Final Jeopardy, it wasn't even a game anymore. At the end of this round, he had 2,500, I think. The other guy had 5,400. Watson is sitting there at over 36,000. So if this Jeopardy game was being considered to be a Turing test, well, Watson has massively failed that Turing test. If you had to guess which one of these was the supercomputer, you would probably say, I think the $36,000 contestant is a supercomputer. But it hasn't failed because it doesn't have enough knowledge, right? It failed because it's clearly better than these two players. So whether or not the Turing test is really a valid test of mentality anymore has to be brought into question, because we're getting to the point where computers are doing things noticeably better than humans. So might fail the Turing test just because of that that advantage. All right, so let's wrap this up here.
What is Toronto?
All right, and one more thing. That's the wrong answer. But it's very instructive that Watson, as good as its mentality is, as good as its cognitive abilities is, it does seem to think like a human does. So remember, Ken Jennings said, it's just like a really good Jeopardy player. And here we can see that even in its errors, it's still kind of thinking like a human. So Toronto has a large airport. Toronto has an airport. When it couldn't find the right answer, it came up with what is a very human-like guess, right? So it didn't just write, what is Mary Poppins? Because it couldn't find out what the right answer was. It came up with something that you would come up with if you didn't know the correct answer to the question. So it is very human-like. And again, an understanding of how Watson works, because you can actually look in at its programming, might shed a lot of light on how our own cognition operates.
A lot of question marks, which means
yeah, and it even identified
had
maybe
many doubts. And the wager, how much are you going to lose? Oh, you sneak. $947.
The final match of the tournament, who is the champion, taking home a $1 million prize?
The Art of the Steal for $1,200.
But IBM may be the ultimate winner, showing off the prowess of Watson with its 10 racks of computer servers. Just stop stay.
$1,246, please.
The Associated Press.
All right, so that is our look at AI. Any final questions? Yep.
More just a little comment. I looked up the Alexa Siri thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they haven't, as far as I know, they haven't been tested, but something called the Cleverbot passed the Turing test in 2011. Not the one that you
Not the
posted,
Loebner
but
Prize?
another. It was in India. I can't say the name, but it was a Technique festival in India.
Oh, okay.
So I just thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So we got we have maybe one passing of the Turing test. Yeah, so we're getting there.
59.3% of the time, apparently.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get directly on 50-50. You just need to be statistically, at 50, I would imagine. But yeah, I mean, we are now getting to the point where generalized computer abilities are reaching human-like, or maybe even surpassing human-like performance. So the question of what do we, like Alex Trebek said, where do we go from here? What do we do in terms of humanity and our place in humanity? Our place in the world. Because one of the things that human beings have always held was that we're the smartest things on earth, right? That has always been one of our claims and part of our identity. And you could hear it in those other two Jeopardy contestants, especially the second one, I can't remember his name, where he was saying, well, we feel the need to strike a blow for humanity, right? We feel the need to, stand up for humans. And it's like, yeah, it's a threat to our identity. So that is another topic altogether. But you can see it if you have interest in AI, take a look and just search for violence against AI. And there is anger in our society geared towards artificial intelligence. There's resistance to self-driving cars. There's resistance to automatic delivery bots. And again, part of that resistance comes from the question of what do we do? Where do we go from here? When the main thing that we do, which is thinking that sets us apart, is no longer purely a human skill. All right, any final questions or comments before we start off on attention? Yep.
I think mine's just more of a comment. I guess I'm struggling to understand why we are saying that a computer program is a mentality. Like it's man-made. It's not. I guess in my head, it's not like computers are out there recreating themselves as robots and creating their own population. Like, obviously it's going to be smarter because you probably have several people working on it. You can program anything you want into it, just like you could a human. So I guess I don't see them on the same platform. I guess to me, a computer program is not alive. It doesn't have a mentality. It's not like thinking. It's a computer program that's made to do that.
Yep. And I mean, that's like the fundamental issue that people were trying to get at. And that's one of the fundamental questions of artificial intelligence. Because as soon as something has a mind, as soon as something has this idea of mentality, along with that, I think there comes certain rights for that entity, right? So
if it gains knowledge to be able to come up, like even information processing theories for humans, then it would have the knowledge to recreate machines like that. You know what I mean? Like what would stop programs if it can deliver thoughts.
But I mean,
But I think it is similar to humans.
It could. I mean, it could be whether or not it's similar to humans. I mean, this is a debate that has been still going on, in philosophy and computer science and computer programming, whether or not, even if you could get it to pass the Turing test, does it still have mentality, or is it a simulation of mentality, right? So the same way that if you think about raining, it's not raining in your mind. When a computer says, I'm thinking about raining, does it really, it doesn't make it so, like it doesn't have that necessarily conscious experience. But then again, the premise of the Turing test was that we don't know that for humans either. So I have no idea if you're conscious. And you could tell me, oh, I'm conscious. And I would still say, well, I still don't have any evidence, right? I can look in my own brain and say, yeah, I'm conscious. I'm aware of what's going on right now. And I'm aware that I'm aware of what's going on right now. And I'm aware that I'm aware of what's going on right now. But for you or for anybody else, I don't know. And if we were to, take a CAT scan to everybody in here, and one of you is a robot, it would be surprising, but it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. So the idea of, is it the same thing as a human, is a question that, we could spend the rest of the semester on and still not get a foothold on. And it's a question that highly, highly intelligent people differ on, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. There's there's incredibly smart people on both sides of this idea that are saying computers can never be considered to have a mind, and other people are like, well, no, computers can be considered to have a mind. But one of the things that I think is a real kind of driving force, and you'll see this in sci-fi all the time, is that as soon as something has a mind, it links it to certain rights, right? There are certain rights that we give to things that have a mind. So it's not all the human rights that you get, because people will say, well, cats have minds, dogs have minds, right? And we protect animals. There's rules against animal cruelty. There's rules about how, you can get punished for animal abuse. There are no rules for rocks, right? Nobody is going to say, you haven't fed your rock and you haven't taken care of your rock, and that's rock abuse, right? Because we're like, rocks don't have minds. So the idea that, I think for a lot of people, the idea that computers can get minds would be linked with the idea that these programs would then have rights. And again, you always see it in sci-fi stories. Oftentimes, the robots have been used in a way that is very wrong if they had minds. So at the very least, I think as ethical entities, we should be asking ourselves, when does that kind of cross the line? What kind of rights should an AI program have? And again, you're going to get people on both sides. People who are like, AI should have as many rights as a hammer because they're both tools. People on the other hand saying AI should have all the rights that humans have. They should be able to own property. You should be able to marry a program, all those sort of things. So you got people on both sides, but it's an important thing to consider this, because again, it's a nice test in terms of what makes a mind, right? So we know that we have minds, but what is it that we have? What is it that makes a mind? So it's a good idea to kind of get that definition down so that it'll just further increase our understanding of what cognition and what mentality is. One of the hardest questions to answer in all of psychology, and we don't even have a way to get to it yet, is why are we conscious? Why are we aware of what we're doing? As we go through, I'll point out there's almost nothing that we are going to learn about cognition this semester that requires that we are aware of what we're doing. Most of it could just be done completely without awareness. So maybe an understanding of what makes a mind will finally give us the new concepts that we need to understand why do we have consciousness, and then further it. So it's a good question to ask, and it has, societal implications. But what side of it you're on, that depends on what aspects you consider, more important than, what other aspects. And like I said, it's something where PhDs who specialize in this, people with years of knowledge and years of specialization in this specific topic, half of them are on one side, half of them are on the other, right? So it's not an indication that you haven't considered things. It's just an indication that this is a very complex topic. Any other comments on AI? Questions? All right. So let's move now to attention. So one of the things that we're going to see often occur in as we go through cognitive psychology is you're going to see a word that you know the meaning of. So I would imagine everybody here knows what the meaning or the definition of attention is in the English language, but we're going to see that we have to get very clear on it from a cognitive psychology point of view in terms of what attention is or what any concept is, because unfortunately, psychology and science oftentimes borrows a lot of terms from the English language, and then those terms come with their own kind of baggage along that. Some of it is used and some of it is not used. So we'll start off right now with what is attention. So let's say that you are looking here at the School of Athens by Raphael. So this is a very complicated picture, and it has way too much information for you to process all at once. So I might ask you, let's see here. So if I was to ask you in here that I want you to find the image of Leonardo da Vinci. So Raphael hid an image of Leonardo da Vinci in here, and that's what Leonardo looks like. So can anybody find him? Hands up if you do. All right, we got a few. All right, so he is actually right there. That's where he is right there. So when you were looking specifically for Leonardo da Vinci, you had to use your attention, and you probably started scanning each and every single face. You probably started focusing your processing power on each of those individual faces. If you're a hair metal fan or bands from the 80s, you might remember or know Guns N' Roses. So if I said, where in this picture did they get their Use Your Illusion 2 cover from? Once again, hands up if you find it. All right, we got a little bit more. So once again, in this case, you just can't look at the entire picture and say, I'm going to process the whole thing. Boom, there it is. You kind of have to scan across the entire picture to find that one area where that image is. So attention, part of what attention is, or part of the reason we have it, is because there's just too much information to process all at once. And one of the places where you can see attention being used is if you're in comic book culture, they love to go over very specific details and use their attention to analyze just about everything that comes out. So if you have seen the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer, how many people here have seen it? All right. Maybe. Okay, so if you were watching the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer, I'm going to say Home Alone trailer, which would be awesome. But anyways, if you were watching Spider-Man Far From Home, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's too much stuff to process. And if you saw his passport there, like some people did, you would need to use your attention and focus on specific details to realize that they didn't put a year on his passport. So again, very small detail, too much information to process, need to focus in on these specific details. That's basically the heart of what attention is. So the attention is the ability to focus on specific stimuli or focus on specific locations. And attention is also the processes by which that information is selected for processing. So it's not just the actual processing of the information, but it's also how do we choose that information. That's all part of the process that we label as attention. And importantly, it happens, this is a little obvious, but it happens when there's more information than you can process. So when there's more information available that you need to process than you currently can process, that is when this mechanism of attention gets engaged. All right, so we're talking about information processing. So again, this is in your mind. You're processing this information. So why is it that oftentimes you don't really seem to need to focus in on stimuli and other times you do need to focus in on stimuli? Why is it that sometimes you can take in a lot of information and process it very quickly? Other times you got to really slow down and go piece by piece and detail by detail. Well, part of the answer for that has to do with two different types of processing, which is parallel and serial processing. So let's start off with parallel processing. And this parallel processing, if you are into computer science, you probably heard this when talking about computer processors. But parallel processing, that's processing in your mind that can process multiple units of information all at the same time. Serial processing, on the other hand, are mechanisms in your mind, information processing systems in your mind that can only process one unit of information at a time. So parallel processing can take multiple units of info. Serial processing can take one unit of info. And whatever a unit of info is defined as, it differs from task to task, but you can think of it as one chunk of information. A serial processor has to process each chunk one at a time. A parallel processor can do multiple chunks all at once. So let's take a look at what this would look like visually. Let's say that this is a representational level explanation of what a parallel processor looks like in your mind. And let's say that that's the input, that's the output, and we start to have information units going towards the processor. So here we have a whole bunch of information units, 4 different streams of information units, and they're coming to the processor, coming to the processor, coming to the processor. So we got 16 pieces of information that need to be processed by this parallel processor. In this situation, a parallel processor can process multiple pieces of information at the same time. So when these 4 units of information hit the input layer, they can get processed all 4 at once and output in a changed way into the output section. So then the next layer of information comes in, they get processed all at once. The 3rd layer of information comes in, they get processed all at once. The 4th layer of information comes in, it gets processed all at once. And you can see that very quickly 16 units of information have been processed by this parallel processor. Any questions so far? You can contrast that with the serial processor. The serial processor, it's a better joke than your reaction. A serial processor has inputs and it has outputs. And let's take a look at how it would process those same 16 pieces of information. So once again, we have these 16 pieces of information coming in, this time to the serial processor. But the difference here is that a serial processor can only do 1 piece of information at a time. So it can process this first piece of blue information, but only 1 piece at a time and only 1 stream at a time. So it can do the first piece of blue information and it can output that. But all of these pieces of information have to wait. They have to wait for the serial processor to finish. And then it can take in the second blue piece. And it can take in the 3rd and the 4th. And then once it's done with the blue stream of information, then it can switch and start taking in the red stream. So the blue stream now is traveling somewhere else. The red stream comes in. And then finally it can do the green stream, piece by piece by piece by piece. And then finally it can do the purple stream, piece by piece by piece by piece. And it takes a lot longer for the serial processor to process that info.
Sorry, I'm a little bit confused.
Sure.
What purpose does the serial processing process have for us then if the parallel processing processes better? You do things faster, look at more things.
That's a good question. Why do we have certain things serial processors and certain things parallel processors? One of the kind of guiding principles for our mind is that our mind is as smart as it needs to be and as stupid as it can be. So it's as lazy as it can be. So a lot of people always think that, a lot of people that dream, because we value intelligence in our society. Oftentimes the wish is like, oh, I wish we had bigger brains. Could you imagine, if we were, much more intelligent? And again, go back to sci-fi and you'll see in the future humans are usually, with the big, huge heads because we got big, huge brains and, just doing all sorts of wonderful cognitive things. Your brain takes up so much energy from your body that to increase the computing power of your brain would mean like a massive, just change to your metabolism. And the energy expenditure of it is rather large. Mm-hmm. So what basically our brain has developed to do is developed to be good enough without being more than we need. So yeah, so that's why not everything is a parallel processor, because probably, and I'm not in the neuropsychology of this, but I would imagine that just the metabolic cost of having all serial processors would be massive.
So, could you kind of maybe give an example of the difference between, when would this be used in our functioning versus the parallel processor?
Yes.
Is that with the attention?
Exactly. That is coming up. That's exactly where we're going. So we got these parallel processors, few steps. Serial processors take a lot of steps. So for those 16 pieces of information, parallel processor got it done in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slides was basically what we needed for all the information to even reach it. Actually, once it reached it, we had 1, 2, 3, 4. We only needed 4 slides in order to process all that information. A serial processor, on the other hand, requires many steps. So this is what was required for the serial processor to process the exact same information. And this is why serial processors take a lot longer, take a lot more time, and why when you're doing a task that involves serial processing, you can see the behavioral slowdown in terms of your ability to complete that task. So I know we got examples of parallel versus serial processing coming up. So one of the places where we can see serial versus parallel processing and having one versus not having the other has to do with face perception. So what I'm going to do in the next slide is I'm going to pop up an image on the screen. And if you've seen it already, recuse yourself from the demonstration. But if you haven't seen it already, what I'd like you to do is put your hand up as soon as you figure out which one of those faces has something weird about it. So there's going to be something weird about the face. If you know, well, as soon as you determine, is it the left face or is it the right face, put your hand up and we'll take a look at approximately how long it takes. So is everybody ready? All right. All right, so that took about 5 seconds before we got just about everybody's hand up. So 5 seconds it took to process this particular image. Let's try it one more time. All right, and this time, once again, hands up when you can identify which side has the weird face. All right, like half a second it took in that case. So this is an example of parallel processing versus serial processing. And this is an example of, again, our minds being as smart as they need to be, but as stupid as they possibly can be. So in our daily lives, this is a very important task, right? Recognizing people's faces upright is a very important task. So if I just take a sample in this classroom of the number of upright faces right now, it's at 100%. And if you were to record how many upright faces you see per day, you would probably be either at 100%, or if you have children, maybe 99.5%, right? But usually, you're looking at upright faces. So we have a parallel processor in our mind, because this is such an important task, that processes it in a parallel manner. This is not an important task. We rarely ever get to this. So this doesn't have a processor that's been specialized as a parallel processor for it. So when you were looking at this, it took you a while because you couldn't take in the face as a whole and process the whole thing. You had to say, all right, well, there's an eye. That looks fine. There's an eye. That looks fine. There's a mouth. That looks fine. Oh, but wait a second. In that orientation, no, that's not right. And that's why it took you piece by piece. Let's put it all together. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4. Oh, wait a second. Now I finally see it. That was your serial processor going through, because this is not an important task. On the other hand, when you saw this face here, you processed this whole thing all at once. You took in all those pieces of information, and they all went through your facial processor all at the same time, because recognizing and interpreting upright faces is an important task. So that's one of the examples of having a parallel versus a serial processor. And you can see the behavioral consequences of that, where, it was super quick on this one, super slow on the other one. Mm-hmm.
Does interest have a role in which one you're going to choose? Because, if you don't care about something, you're like, well, I don't care. But if you really care about something, you're like, well, I really want to look into this. And,
you mean interest in, long term, or interest in the task at hand?
Interest in the task at hand. If I'm interested in what you're talking about, if I'm interested in learning about whatever we're learning, would your brain use parallel instead of serial because you're more...
So in terms of interest level, no.
Okay.
So typically you have the processors that are already built into your brain. We come with kind of preloaded processors for a lot of things. But what often happens is as you gain expertise, your serial processors will change to parallel processors. So if you take a look at dog experts, when you first start learning how to identify breeds of dogs, you identify them piece by piece, right? You say, okay, I'm looking for like what's this color, what's the shape of the nose, what's the shape of this, and then eventually after doing it for years and years, you see a dog and you're like, boom, that's a Portland Collie from Northern Ireland or whatever. You see it immediately. So you can turn your serial processors into parallel processors through training, through practice, and that's why I needed you to clarify interest, because if you have interest in certain things, over time, you will get better at identifying those things, and you will develop these kind of serial processing processors.
Like in soccer, if I play soccer, like I can like just examine a play really quick. Where like when I'm coaching, I'm like, come on, like.
Yeah.
Like I can go like piece by piece when I just see it as like a whole.
Exactly, because you see it as a whole because you are parallel processing that information. The players that you're coaching, you literally said you got to give it to them piece by piece, which means they are serially processing that information, and eventually they'll see the play, and they'll see it very quickly. But right now they're taking in, this is where this person is, let me process that. That's where that person is, let me process that. That person has the ball, let me process that. Oh, that's what this play is, right? So it's you can change your processors depending upon what you practice. And that's one of the reasons. So one of the things that we're going to touch on is why do we have this facial processor, this parallel facial processor? And one school of thought says it's built in, like just evolutionarily, we have this region of the brain that is specifically done for faces because faces are so important. Another theory or school of thought is that we're just so practiced at doing this. One of the things that we look at the most is faces, right? So maybe it's just because we have years and years of experience looking at faces. That's why we have this, this parallel processor. All right, so other examples of serial versus parallel processing. We got visual search. This one's a little bit more straightforward. So what I'm going to do is I am going to pop up a bunch of stimuli. And what I want you to do is I want you to find the B. So you're looking for the B, and you're looking for it among distractor P's, right? So there's going to be P's up there to distract you. You're looking for the B. That's the target. And what we'll do again is just put your hand up as soon as you see, or as soon as you've located where the B is. So this is going to start easy, and it's going to get more difficult. So is everybody ready? All right. Okay, so half a second, about as long as it took you to raise your arm. All right, next one. All right, about 2, maybe 3 seconds. All right, last one. All right, longer than the middle one, maybe about 4 or 5 seconds. So you notice that in this case, as the number of distractors went up, the time that it took you to find that B increased and increased and increased. So let's take a look at the next demonstration. And what I want you to do is I want you to find the O, and it's going to be among distractor X's. All right, so once again, hands up as soon as you find that target O. All right, that was super fast. What if we put in more X's? All right, still super fast. What about even more? Still super fast. So you'll notice that in this case, there was no change in the speed that you were able to find that O as we increase the number of distractors. And this is another example of parallel processing, which is the ability to take in all the information, process it all at once, and say, oh, there's the O. Because you could take in I don't know how many I put in here, but you could take in the 62 X's very easily and the O and say, boom, there's the O. You could take in your reaction times did not change as the number of distractors increased. Contrast that with the B versus P, where as the number of distractors increased, your processing time increased, indicating that you're serially processing that information. Because as more information needed to go through that processor, it took you much, much longer to process each one individually until you found that target B. All right, any questions on serial versus parallel processing? All right. So what we're going to go to now is we're going to go to a phenomenon known as change detection. So this was a phenomenon that was found quite recently. I believe it first came to prominence in the 90s. And this is a good indication that we are not as aware of our environment as we typically feel that we are. So change detection, it demonstrates just how important attention is. Because for us to truly notice our environment and change our environment, we need to dedicate attention to the aspects of the environment that we consider important, process those, and dedicate processing power to that. So we tend to process information that indicates change. And we're going to take a look at an example. You might have seen this one before. I got a backup just in case. But we'll see this test of awareness. Let's see if it'll work. Yeah, I kind of spoiled it a bit. But anyways, take a look at the test of awareness and follow the instructions.
How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
All right, so, oh wait, let me see if I can pause it. All right, so, who saw the moonwalking bear? All right, we had a few people. I kind of spoiled it because the moonwalking bear was in the original thing, but whose hands up again if you saw it? Okay, so this is a nice example of your need for attention in order to process information that becomes massively obvious once you attend to it. It's not tricky information, but if you don't attend to it, the implication is you're not even processing it. So when you're paying attention to the number of passes done by the white team, you tend to miss something that is readily apparent, in the video. So it's not a small change; it's a rather large change. So that's change detection. So the question is, why did we miss something as obvious, as this moonwalking bear? So any ideas?
Focused on the white team.
We were focused on the white team. So we were processing specifically one aspect of this environment. And when we were processing that aspect of the environment, other aspects of it, we were kind of aware that they were there. They didn't disappear. It's not like the other players all of a sudden became invisible, but we didn't detect or put enough processing power in there to notice that there was a moonwalking bear. Mm-hmm.
I think the change wasn't big enough for me to text. If it was like a brown bear, that one kind of just blends in with the black.
Or if it was a white bear.
So that's another thing. If it was a white bear, if it was a brown bear, would it have been easier? Would it have been easier to
like a rooster? Like I saw a rooster.
Well, that's a good question. So one of the reasons why the bear is so effective is because you're paying attention to the white team. You're trying not to process the black team, and then it's a black bear that comes in there. So whatever processing you do, you're not unaware that there's the other team there. But whatever amount of processing you've dedicated to that black team is not enough to distinguish it from the black bear. So that's part of the reason why this one is effective. And if you did use a white moonwalking bear, like a moonwalking polar bear, then you would see an increase in the number of people that detected that particular change. So I'll give you another example. We already discussed that. And what does this say about what attention, how attention works? Basically, this kind of foreshadows two things that we're going to get to. One thing that we're going to get to, and one thing that we've seen already. First off, in your environment, there's way more information than you can pay attention to. And as we've seen with the face processing, we tend to focus on things that are important to us that are important to our survival or the task at hand. So in this case, you can't process all of that information when you're viewing this. So you tend to focus on what you need to do the task. You focus on the white team, and you don't process anything else enough in order for you to notice the moonwalking bear. On the other hand, if you weren't asked to count the number of passes, if you were just told, watch this video, right, and see if there's anything weird in this video, you probably would have noticed the moonwalking bear. So there's something about certain stimuli that grabs our attention, and we're going to get to that in just a little bit. But there's also there are things where there's part of our attention that can be moved to a place that we need to focus on, such as when we said pay attention to the number of passes on the white team. But there's also something about the environment that'll also just grab your attention. And if you've ever been distracted, right, if you've ever been paying attention to something, you're like, oh wait, what was that? Your attention has been grabbed by some source in your environment. So let's take a look at another one, in case you've already seen this one. So for this next video, if you've been in my P211 class, you've seen this one. What I want you to do in this case is I'd like you to focus on the inspector and focus on whether or not the inspector's coat changes.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's goat below stairs. I was planting my petunias in the rocking chair. Constable, arrest Lady Smythe. How did you know? Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out of the way. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
All right, how observant were you? Hands up if the inspector's coat changed. All right, so everybody got that. Your vision's working fine. And your attention's working fine. Anything else? Did anybody else notice anything weird? Mm-hmm.
His coat is open,
The guy who's laying on the floor, his coat is open. It wasn't before. All right.
Is there not a night? The butler has a.
So not like the night changed.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The butler dude had a rolling pin.
Rolling pin turned into a candlestick. Yep.
Potted plant shrunk.
Potted plant shrunk. Anything else? Yep.
The weapon change. Like whatever's next to him is bottom.
Oh, whatever's next to him on the floor, next to the victim changed. Yep.
I think the rug changed.
The rug changed.
Was there flowers there before? Flowers on the table.
You think the flowers might have changed? Okay. All right, so we got 7 changes, 7 other changes, plus the inspector's coat, right? So we've noticed 8 changes in this particular demonstration. All right, 21 changes. So a room full of people didn't even get half of the changes that occurred in this particular situation.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's goat below stairs. I was planting my petunias in the rocking chair. Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
All right, so 21 changes. And basically, when I was asking for, did anything change? If you didn't see anything change, you could have just pointed and said that, anything, like that thing changed, that thing might have changed, because they literally changed everything in the room. So this is another example, number one, of how important attention is. Because again, everybody noticed the change of the inspector's coat. Right? There wasn't anybody in here that said, oh, it turned tan, it was gray, oh my gosh, I missed that. Because you were attending to that. You were giving your processing power to that particular piece of information. Everything else was basically missed because you did not attend to that. You didn't have that information entering your processor. And it's interesting when we take a look at the Cog Lab on change detection, one of the things that students typically notice in here is the suit of armor. So I've yet to do this demonstration where somebody in the class doesn't notice that the suit of armor was something weird about the suit of armor. And one of the things about the suit of armor, and this again it'll come into the Cog Lab, is that when they did the switch, the suit of armor was one of the only stationary things that was kind of moving.
Yeah.
And as we're going to see, motion is a very important stimulus in our environment. Motion is very important to humans, and our perceptual systems are drawn to processing motion.
Is that why you talk with your hands?
No, I just, it might be. Now I feel like.
Because like when you talk, I just like look at your hands.
Anyways, I mean, that's just, it might be, I mean, if it's.
Well, like everyone talks with their hands. See, you don't even know you're doing it.
Well, talking with your hands, I mean.
It's part of speech.
Part of that could be speech, because part of that is part of expression, right? But yeah, I mean, it might be effective. But that's why, now everybody's just going to notice how much. But that is also why, I mean, as we're going to see, motion is very important. And this is a very nice example, again, of your mind being as smart as it needs to be, but as stupid as it possibly can be. So in our evolutionary history, in human development, motion was extremely important. Because if you had a tiger charging towards you, it was a good idea to notice that. If you were paying attention to something else and you saw something move over here, it was a good idea for your cognitive system to say, motion, attend, right? So we have built-in mechanisms that will see motion, pick it up, and it will draw our attention. We don't have to be told to pay attention to motion. We naturally pay attention to motion, and that's why in just about every single class, somebody notices the suit of armor. That's also why whenever you're trying to get somebody's attention, you move, right? So when you're looking for somebody in a crowd and they don't see you, you're like, hey, over here, this, over here. That's because motion is important to us. The other thing is that this is a very good demonstration that we don't process things that are not important to us. So many static things, so many constant things change. And the reason that we don't process those, again, is because they're not important to our everyday survival. So if I didn't tell you to take a look at the inspector's coat, chances are most of you would have missed the fact that the coat changed. Nobody noticed that his hat changed. Right? Nobody put it up and said, oh, he also changed his hat. And one of the reasons for that is because our clothes in our world don't change, right? Clothes in our world basically stay constant. So I don't have to continually monitor my clothes to make sure that they're still there, right? Clothes are important, but they don't change. And I don't have to monitor everybody's clothes here because nobody's going to duck underneath their desk and come up in a new jacket, right? Nobody's going to duck underneath their desk and change their jeans. So I don't need to pay attention to that. I don't need to put my processing power on monitoring clothes because they stay the same. So as you're going to see, in a lot of attention, things that stay the same, things that are constant, are things that we don't put a lot of processing power to. But things that do change, such as motion, those things are usually what grabs our attention, and we will process that information as well. So we were originally, I was going to do where does attention come from. We talked a little bit about it. You know, it comes from the task, which you are told to focus on. It comes from things in your environment that grab your attention. This is going to take a little bit longer than 5 minutes, so we're going to wrap it up at this point. But any final questions or comments on what we've seen so far today? Yep.
Did they change the actors or a couple of the actors too in that video?
Yeah. Changed the dead person.
Okay.
Yeah, the dead person was changed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean the links are there. It's in the notes. Watch it again. Watch Moonwalking Bear again. And there's tons of examples of change blindness that indicate just how bad we are at noticing these changes. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And mostly due to practice.
Okay,
a
that's
lot
why I
of
wondered
the
how much.
a lot of the stuff that we're, I mean, there are some innate differences. Like if you have propagnosia or something, it's your inability to see faces.
Yeah.
But typically, everybody is pretty much at the same level for a lot of things. But then if you practice something, you just get way, way better. All right, so that is it. So I will see you all next week.